Okay, everyone, we are going to do one more section of reading to page 123. So if you put your book down, I need you to open it back up to page 118. Get there quickly now. Okay, so our focus is the same. We're going to keep analyzing this conflict between Ralph and Jack. It kind of heats up more in these pages. Okay, everyone, so we are going to start reading on the very last sentence of page 118. So the very bottom of 118 at the pig track. So here we have Ralph and Jack beginning, ready to kind of go look for the beast in this last place. Keep examining how they talk to each other and what the conflict is. The pig track was a dark tunnel, for the sun was sliding quickly toward the edge of the world, and in the forest shadows were never far to seek. The track was broad and beaten, and they ran along at its swift trot. Then the roof of leaves broke up, and they halted, breathing quickly, looking at the few stars that pricked around the head of the mountain. There you are. The boys peered at each other doubtfully. Ralph made a decision. We'll go straight across the platform and climb tomorrow. They murmured in agreement, but Jack was standing by his shoulder. If you're frightened, of course. Ralph turned on him. Who went first on the castle rock? I went too, and that was daylight. All right. Who wants to climb the mountain now? Silence was the only answer. Sam and Eric, what about you? We ought to go and tell Piggy. Yes, tell Piggy that. But Simon went. We ought to tell Piggy in case... Robert, Bill, they were going straight back to the platform now. Not, of course, that they were afraid, but tired. Ralph turned back to Jack. Okay, so essentially they hit the bottom, and now Ralph and Jack are like, hey, we should go up the mountain. Like, who's going to come with us? And everyone's like, maybe we should go back and tell Piggy. So we're going to go back now. So now it's just a few of them left. So Ralph turned back to Jack. You see, I'm going up the mountain. The two words came from Jack viciously, as though they were a curse. He looked at Ralph, his thin body tensed, his spear held as if it threatened him. I'm going up the mountain to look for the beast. Now. Then the supreme sting, the casual, bitter word. Coming? At that word, the other boys forgot their urge to be gone and turned back to sample this fresh rub of two spirits in the dark. The word was too good, too bitter, too successfully daunting to be repeated. It took Ralph at low water when his nerve was relaxed for the return to the shelter in the still, friendly waters of the lagoon. I don't mind. Astonished, he heard his voice come out, cool and casual, so that the bitterness of Jack's taunt felt powerless. Okay, everyone, so we're going to take a look at that passage really fast. Jack says, I'm going up the mountain. The words came from Jack viciously as though they were a curse. He looked at Ralph, his thin body tensed, his spear held as if it threatened him. I'm going up the mountain to look for the beast. Now. Then the supreme sting, the casual, bitter word. Coming? At that word, the other boys forgot their urge to be gone and turned back to sample this fresh rub of two spirits in the dark. The word was too good, too bitter, too successfully daunting to be repeated. It took Ralph at low water when his nerve was relaxed for the return to shelter in the still, friendly waters of the lagoon. I don't mind. Okay, so two questions for you. The first one, how is the word coming described in this passage? So how is it described? And why do you think it is described this way? Answer that now, and answer it in two sentences. Okay, so the word is described as supreme sting, meaning it really stings. It's described as bitter and daunting. It's described this way because it is a challenge to Ralph to test his authority and bravery. Jack, when he says coming, essentially saying, I'm brave and tough enough to go up the mountain at night. Are you? Okay, so then my second question to you. How does Ralph respond? How does he respond to Jack's challenge of saying coming? Why do you think he reacts this way? I would like you to use the word bravado in your answer. So if you remember from yesterday, bravado means trying to not show fear, essentially. So how does Ralph use bravado in his response to Jack? Answer that now. Okay, so he responds with, I don't mind. He does it really casually. He's trying to have bravado by acting tough and showing that he's not afraid. He does this so that others think that he is just as brave and strong as Jack is. Okay, everyone, so we're going to pick up very near the top of page 120 at astonished he heard his voice. Astonished, he heard his voice come out, cool and casual, so that the bitterness of Jack's taunt felt powerless. If you don't mind, of course. Oh, not at all. Jack took a step. Well then. Side by side, watched by silent boys, the two started up the mountain. Ralph stopped. We're silly. Why should only two go? If we find anything, two won't be enough. There came the sound of boys scuttling away. Astonishingly, a dark figure moved against the tide. Roger? Yes. That's three then. Once more they set out to climb the slope of the mountain. The darkness seemed to flow around them like a tide. Jack, who had said nothing, began to choke and cough, and a gust of wind set all three spluttering. Ralph's eyes were blinded with tears. Ashes! We're on the edge of the burnt patch. Their footsteps in the occasional breeze were stirring up small devils of dust. Now that they stopped again, Ralph had time while he coughed to remember how silly they were. If there was no beast, and almost certainly there was no beast, in that case, well and good. But if there was something waiting on top of the mountain, what was the use of three of them, handicapped by the darkness and carrying only sticks? We're being fools. Out of the darkness came the answer. Windy? Irritably, Ralph shook himself. This was all Jack's fault. Course I am, but we're still being fools. If you don't want to go on then, said the voice sarcastically, I'll go up by myself. Ralph heard the mockery and hated Jack. The sting of ashes in his eyes, tiredness, fear enraged him. Go on then, we'll wait here. There was silence. Why don't you go? Are you frightened? A stain in the darkness, a stain that was Jack, detached itself and began to draw away. All right, so long. The stain vanished. Another took its place. Ralph felt his knee against something hard and rocked and charred trunk that was edgy to the touch. He felt the sharp cinders that had been bark push against the back of his knee and knew that Roger had sat down. He felt with his hands and lowered himself beside Roger, while the trunk rocked among invisible ashes. Roger, uncommunicative by nature, said nothing. He offered no opinion on the beast, nor told Ralph why he had chosen to come on this mad expedition. He simply sat and rocked the trunk gently. Ralph noticed a rapid and infuriating tapping noise and realized that Roger was banging his silly wooden stick against something. So they sat, the rocking, tapping, impervious Roger and Ralph, fuming. Round them, the close sky was loaded with stars, save where the mountain punched up a hole of blackness. There was a slithering noise high above them, the sound of someone taking giant and dangerous strides on rock or ash. Then Jack found them and was shivering and croaking in a voice they could just recognize as his. I saw a thing on top. They heard him blunder against the trunk, which rocked violently. He lay silent for a moment, then muttered, Keep a good lookout. It may be following. A shower of ash pattered round them. Jack sat up. I saw a thing bulge on the mountain. You only imagined it, said Ralph shakily. Because nothing would bulge, not any sort of creature. Roger spoke. They jumped, for they had forgotten him. A frog. Jack giggled and shuddered. Some frog. There was a noise, too, a kind of plop noise. Then the thing bulged. Ralph surprised himself, not so much by the quality of his voice, which was even, but by the bravado of his intention. We'll go and look. For the first time since he had first known Jack, Ralph could feel him hesitate. Now? His voice spoke for him. Of course. He got off the trunk and led the way across the clinking cinders up into the dark, and the others followed. Now that his physical voice was silent, the inner voice of reason, and other voices too, made themselves heard. Piggy was calling him a kid. Another voice told him not to be a fool, and the darkness and desperate enterprise gave the night a kind of dentist's chair unreality. Okay, so we're going to look at this. So Ralph says, after Jack says that he did see something on top of the mountain, Ralph says, we'll go and look. For the first time since he had first known Jack, Ralph could feel him hesitate. Now? Ralph's voice spoke for him. Of course. He got off the trunk and led the way across the clinking cinders up into the dark, and the others followed. Now, this last part is about Ralph. Now that his physical voice was silent, the inner voice of reason, and other voices too, made themselves heard. Piggy was calling him a kid. Another voice told him not to be a fool, and the darkness and desperate enterprise gave the night a kind of dentist chair on reality. So 2 questions for you here. What does it mean that Ralph's voice spoke for him? So before he says, of course, it says that Ralph's voice spoke for him. What does that mean? Go ahead and answer that now in a sentence. Okay, so it probably means he didn't actually think about what he said or how he said it. It might also show that these words he didn't actually want to say those words. So he essentially says, of course we'll go look up the mountain. But it's kind of like he was like, oh shoot, wait, what did I just say? So that's what it means. His voice spoke for him. He didn't really think about it. He just said it, and he might not have even wanted to actually say that. So then my second question to you, why do you think he hears Piggy's voice in his head calling him a kid? So it says, now that his physical voice was silent, his inner voice and the voices of others made themselves heard. Piggy was calling him a kid. So in his head, he imagines Piggy calling him a kid. Why does he hear Piggy's voice in his head calling him a kid? I would like to use the word rational in your response. Answer that in at least 1 sentence, but probably 2 now. Okay, so since Piggy is such a rational character, remember that means making decisions based off intelligence and logic. Ralph hears Piggy's voice criticizing him in his head, calling him a kid, to show that his actions are childish. So he imagines Piggy being like, dude, you're acting like a child right now. Okay, everyone, so we're just going to finish out this chapter really fast. One more question. Halfway down 122 as they came to the last slope. As they came to the last slope, Jack and Roger drew near, changed from the ink stains to distinguishable figures. By common consent, they stopped and crouched together. Behind them on the horizon was a patch of lighter sky where in a moment the moon would rise. The wind roared once in the forest and pushed their rags against them. Ralph stirred. Come on. They crept forward, Roger lagging a little. Jack and Ralph turned the shoulder of the mountain together. The glittering lengths of the lagoon lay below them, and beyond that, a long white smudge that was the reef. Roger joined them. Jack whispered, let's creep forward on hands and knees. Maybe it's asleep. Roger and Ralph moved on, this time leaving Jack in the rear for all his brave words. They came to the flat top where the rock was hard to hands and knees. A creature that bulged. Ralph put his hand in the cold, soft ashes of the fire and smothered a cry. His hands and shoulder were twitching from the unlooked-for contact. Green lights of nausea appeared for a moment and then ate into the darkness. Roger lay behind him, and Jack's mouth was at his ear. Over there, where there used to be a gap in the rocks, a sort of hump. See? Ashes blew into Ralph's face from the dead fire. He could not see the gap or anything else because the green lights were opening again and growing, and at the top of the mountain was sliding sideways. Once more, from a distance, he heard Jack's whisper, scared. Not scared so much as paralyzed, hung up there and immovable on the top of a diminishing, moving mountain. Jack slid away from him. Roger bumped, fumbled with a hiss of breath, and passed onwards. He heard them whispering, can you see anything? There. In front of them, only 3 or 4 yards away, was a rock-like hump where no rock should be. Ralph could hear a tiny chattering noise coming from somewhere, perhaps from his own mouth. He bound himself together with his will, fused his fear and loathing into hatred, and stood up. He took 2 leaden steps forward. Behind them, the sliver of moon had drawn clear of the horizon. Before them, something like a great ape was sitting asleep with its head between its knees. Then the wind roared in the forest. There was confusion in the darkness, and the creature lifted its head, holding toward them the ruin of a face. Ralph found himself taking giant strides among the ashes, heard other creatures crying out and leaping, and dared the impossible on the dark slope. Presently, The mountain was deserted, save for the 3 abandoned sticks and the thing that bowed. So, final question to you. What is it that Ralph and Jack and Roger just saw on top of the mountain? Okay, so if you do remember, there was a parachutist that came down and got caught up. He's up there where the ash and fire used to be. So when they go up, they see this bowed figure that rises and falls with the wind. So that's what they see, but they can't really see it because it's dark. So they all run away.